Okay, so yesterday we began the section of preparing foods. We started with challah, and we brought where the Torah speaks about Hashem giving us the mitzvah to separate challah. We spoke about how the mitzvah is done. You take a piece of dough, you make a bracha, you separate it, and then it is burned. We spoke about volumes, which was a little bit confusing, but the tachlis, the bottom line was that if you're making more than between 9 and 11 cups of sifted flour. If you're making more than 9 cups of sifted flour, then you do need to separate challah. Less than that, you don't. And if you're making more than 13 cups of sifted flour, then you would make a bracha as well. As far as matzah, so we said we don't want to delay the process, so we actually wait till it's fully baked, and then they put all the matzahs into the container, and then they separate challah from the matzahs. And I mentioned how that concept exists today as well as far as freezers are concerned. If you're doing a few loaves and putting it all into your freezer, it's one container, so then it would total the amount from which one requires to separate challah. Spoke about yeast, and we spoke about how even if you're cooking, but you're cooking dough, then that too would require challah. And that takes us to section number 7. Here we go. So if the dough is kneaded with eggs or fruit juices, so many questions arise concerning the requirement for challah. So for example, if you're making rogalach or any other type of sweet dough, therefore, you should add some water, milk, bee, honey, wine, or olive oil when kneading the dough. Then the challah may be recited with the bracha. So it's actually a question whether you need to also separate challah when making baked goods, meaning sweet baked goods, if it's a thick dough, as opposed to a cake that has a thin paste. But if it's being kneaded into a dough, which is like babka, then you may need to separate challah. Okay, now this mitzvah is one of the special mitzvahs of a woman. There are 3 mitzvahs which are unique to the woman, and they are mikveh, and separating challah, and lighting Shabbos candles. And this is one of those 3. But if the woman is not home, and there's concern that by the time she comes home, the dough will be ruined, then a maid, obviously a Jewish maid or someone else, would be allowed to separate the challah. So she gets first choice, first option, but if the mother's not around, then somebody else can separate challah as well. And here's a very interesting halacha. What happens if you make challah for Shabbos, and then you come to the Shabbos table, and you realize that you forgot to separate challah? Now we said that until that challah is separated, the bread is not kosher. That is what kosherizes it in that final way. So what do you do now? So if you're living outside of Israel, where it's less of an obligation to separate challah, so then you could set aside a piece and separate challah from that piece after Shabbos. That means the piece should be large enough for the separation of challah with some remaining dough unsanctified. For there must be a noticeable remainder. Okay, so basically what we're saying is, if you take a section of the challah and you say, of your loaf of bread, of your challah, and you say, from here I will be separating challah later. So since outside of Israel separating challah is rabbinic, therefore under strenuous circumstances like it's already Shabbos, you would be able to rely on the fact that you will be separating challah later. This is one of the reasons why when we cut the challah on Shabbos, we cut it down the middle. The main reason we cut the challah down the middle is to show out of honor of Shabbos that we're going all out. We're not being cheap. It's not about our honor, it's about the honor of Shabbos. But an added reason why we cut the challah in the middle is that way, if we forgot to separate challah and we cut it in the middle, then the one half gets put aside, and then you start cutting the other half. And of that half that was set aside, from there you would be able to take challah afterwards. Okay, if it's the day before Pesach and you forgot to separate challah, and the challah is baked for Shabbos, so then there's a big debate what to do, because obviously if you're going to leave the dough or the challah to separate it after Shabbos, it will already be Pesach. So bottom line is make sure to remember to separate challah from challah that you're baking right before Pesach. So that is a 101 on the mitzvah of separating challah, one of the 3 mitzvahs which are special for women. And now let's take a look at the laws of salting meats.
Rabbi, just
Yes.
before we move on,
Yes.
how does it work when you buy challah? Kosher challah from